Well, new reaction this morning on a dramatic about-face by President Obama. Yesterday, he announced that he will block the release of photos showing U.S. troops abusing terror suspects in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. Earlier, the president had agreed to release these photos in response to a lawsuit by the American Civil Liberties Union, a lawsuit that was successful. Chris Anders is the senior legislative counsel for the ACLU. He joins me live from Washington. Chris, good morning to you.
Good morning.
This was a big reversal for the president and one that you and your group expressed outrage over. Do you think the president has betrayed you?
I think it's very disappointing that a president who ran his campaign on transparency and openness in government has taken this very unusual, almost unprecedented step of directing the Justice Department to flip its position and directing the Justice Department to make additional arguments and to block the release of photos that the Justice Department and the Defense Department had agreed to produce.
But the Defense Department itself did a reversal on it, which is what led largely to the president's reversal. The Pentagon, General Ray Odierno, General David McKiernan, Iraq and Afghanistan commanders, as well as General David Petraeus, told President Obama they believe if these photos are released, it will cost American lives, American military lives in Iraq and Afghanistan. Why is that not good enough for you to justify the president's reversal?
Well, the courts have already looked at these arguments, and these arguments have been made in the past. The president himself has said that he looked at these photos and he said that he doesn't see much that's sensational about them, and so thought that the Abu Ghraib photos were more disturbing to him. But the reason these photos are important is the American people should know what their government did. But also the reason that these photos are very important is that they are more evidence that the torture issue and the work of torture was not the work of a few bad apples. It wasn't a few privates and sergeants, but this was a pattern. These photos are coming from different places in Afghanistan and Iraq.
But respectfully, Chris, if I could get you back on point, I just want to focus in on the question I asked, because I think that's on the mind of a lot of folks. If the generals on the field tell us and tell the president, if you release these, it's going to cost American lives. American men and women who are fighting for us right now will die as a result. And that's not coming from partisan guys. This is coming from Petraeus, Odierno, McKiernan, and on down the line. And the Pentagon shifted its position and said, you know what? That's good enough for us. President Obama said, me too. The question a lot of Americans would ask you is, who is the ACLU to second guess that?
Look, one of the greatest threats to America's national security and to the progress of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was the torture program implemented by the last administration. The way to move beyond that, the way to increase national security and increase safety is for that program to be brought to an end. And part of bringing it to an end is accountability. And we still have not had a full criminal investigation of how this all took place.
Okay, but they're pushing for that. Some are pushing for a criminal investigation, and Congress is holding hearings, and the so-called torture memos have been released. But on this, and the president sided with you on that, but on these photos, the president said no. And you know, you don't have to trust me on it, Chris. I'm sure you've seen firsthand accounts from our soldiers in the field, one of which I pulled from Staff Sergeant Tyler Foshheim. He's fighting in Afghanistan, who says, the last time I was deployed, patrolling the streets of Mosul, Iraq, when the Abu Ghraib photos exploded, the attacks on my unit grew in frequency and intensity. Now I'm in Afghanistan, and I'm sitting here wondering if it's going to happen again. That was enough for the president. You say we'll be more secure if they're released, but the people on the ground who are going to be taking the bullets say you're wrong.
Well, Look, the best way to have real national security on this issue is to stop hiding the ball.
So they're wrong. The president's wrong.
To have full accountability, and then make sure that this won't happen again. And part of making
Chris,
sure this won't happen again is to have people
how do you
be
respond to Staff Sergeant Tyler Foshheim? I mean, you tell him you take the bullet. Too bad. Long-term accountability is more important.
No. I think we're also in a very different situation than we were 5 years ago when the Abu Ghraib photos first came out, because we do have a president, to his great credit, who has clearly put an end to the program, and that's very different from where we were 5 years ago. And these photos ought to be put out. They ought to be put out, though, as part of an overall program of accountability.
Why not put out later? Why do they have to be put out now while we're still fighting on the ground? A lot of senators in the United States Senate have said, perhaps we do need full accountability, but later, not while these guys are still out there and subject to these retaliatory attacks like we saw after Abu Ghraib photos.
Well, these photos can and could be, and we hope will be, put out by the administration as part of an overall release of everything that that did take place.
Later, you want it now while they're still fighting.
Well, look. We've been looking for these photos for 5 years. We've had two different courts that have looked at the very arguments that are being made now. Arguments that were being pushed very hard.
Looked at them from a legal
at various
standpoint.
times by the Bush administration.
Not a policy standpoint, Chris. Let me ask you before I let you go. The ACLU has pushed successfully to have the release of the so-called torture memos, pushed successfully to have a release of the so-called torture photos, pushed to have more details out on the so-called rendition program where CIA took people out of U.S. control and allegedly extracted information from them through enhanced interrogation techniques. Is there anything the ACLU views as sacred? Is there anything you agree is a national security matter that the United States public does not have the carte blanche right to see?
Look. There are additional documents that are very important, and there are additional documents that Vice President Cheney is looking for too. One of the documents is this Inspector General's report from the CIA. It's something that Vice President Cheney has referenced. Document that
is there anything that's sacred? Is there anything you think is allowed to be kept secret, or do we have the carte blanche right to see everything? Well, look, there are exemptions in the Freedom of Information Act. Actually, pretty broad exemptions for national security reasons, and those exemptions have been used by the past administration, by this administration. But this is a president who is basically trying to override what the courts have done, decisions that the courts have made, and it's something that ought to concern everybody, because there are conservatives, liberals, Republicans, and Democrats who are going to want to know what their government is doing, and it is a bad precedent to have a president step into a case and say, no, I've looked at this information, and this is information I myself don't think the American public should look at. Now, that's what the president has said. He said that, number one, it would not add to our understanding of the events as you described them. And he said that, number two, it would endanger the troops. And moreover, an LA Times poll that's been running on their website shows that 60% of Americans polled so far do not agree with you. They do not think we need to see these photos. Chris, listen, I appreciate you coming on. Sometimes it's hard to get the ACLU to come on. You're a stand-up guy for doing it, and I appreciate you articulating your position. All the best to you.
Okay, thank you.
What I hear from the intel guys is, even if you look at the legal and acceptable means that they use based on the definition of the law, it still would be stunning to people like us, because we're not used to this.
We're not used to seeing it.
So imagine now, if you put this out, what if there's audio on some of these videotapes? How's America or the world going to react then?
Bill,
the ACLU will not give this up, though, and we're going to get this second.
We did this on O'Reilly last week, and I personally read letter after letter from U.S. troops talking about how the attacks on them increased after the Abu Ghraib photos came out. Now, you can blame that on the troops if you want for doing the conduct in the first place.
And the White House admits that now, too.
But the bottom line is they believe if these photos get released, more of them will die. And that's just, with respect to Chris Anders, he couldn't really answer that point.
Well, the ACLU this hour, the other side next hour.